I'm just finding that the more I talk, the more I learn about ADD. Well, having ADD is just not easy, period. Especially not as an adult. Well, it's just not easy at all. It just depends on what stage of life you are in and your journey to being diagnosed. But when you don't get diagnosed until late in life and you don't know about it, it's a pretty intense situation to have to navigate. And that is where I am. Today was a very typical ADD morning for me. So, because of the pandemic, I started a new job back in March of 2020. I left the hospital. I worked in the hospital for like 12 years, and it was difficult leaving because I loved the people I worked with, and I love what I do as a medical lab technician, but long story, I don't need to get into the ins and outs of why I decided to leave the hospital. But I will say that one of the reasons I did choose, one of the many factors that played into my decision to leave the hospital was that I got diagnosed with the ADD when I was like 32, and it was from the time I was 32 to 40 or 39 that I started realizing that so before I knew I had ADD, I was the person who would say, I'm such a good multitasker. I'm really good at multitasking. And let's just say when you don't have ADD, you can be a good multitasker. But when you have ADD, you're really good at multitasking, but not because you're good at multitasking. It's because you don't have a choice. Well, you do have a choice, but let's just ignore that for the moment. Unmanaged ADD. You start and can never finish things, even menial tasks. So what we consider multitasking is really starting and not finishing tasks or whatever the case may be. And so for me, I worked in a very high energy environment. I worked in the central processing department of the lab, and we pretty much brought samples in from all over the hospital, other hospitals. Couriers brought things in. Local clinics would send samples to us, and being the central processing unit, we brought in samples for like 3 different labs, and then we dispersed it out. But we also ran all of the rapid tests, rapid flus, and rapid straps, and so gram stains. It was a very high-paced environment. Now, when you have ADD or ADHD, a high-paced environment is seemingly good for you because our brains are always kind of like running really fast, which then often can kind of make our bodies want to kind of move a little faster. And the nature of where I worked in the hospital, I had to be able to basically like hop from one thing to the next. And I did that really well because of my ADD. But over time, once I started, the times where I was really more aware of my ADD, I would get frustrated because I'd be like, okay, when you have ADD, you suck at completing a task, right? So when you work in the environment that I did at the hospital, you could be answering the phone in the middle of a phone call when you've got a timer going off over here. Then, so you gotta get off that phone as soon as possible so you could then go get the timer. Then, you get the timer and someone comes to the window, and then you get a stat sample coming through the tube station that you got to go process and set it up. And so, but there were so many times throughout my shifts, I worked 10-hour shifts, and at one point I worked all 3 shifts throughout the 12 years that I worked there. And so the environment's different depending on which shift I worked. But at times, even though the nature of this department in the lab was that you needed to be able to bounce around from thing to thing to get everything done, but at times I would get really frustrated because I would be under the hood processing a sample. I'm under there behind a biological safety cabinet with my gloves on and my jacket, and I'm cutting and mincing tissue, and the phone's ringing, or someone comes to the window. There was just always stuff going on around me that was pulling me away from completing a task. And that began to wear on me because I was like, okay, I need to be able to do, hop around and multitask. I need to be able to do that. And I'm good at doing that in the hospital. But when you're trying to learn to navigate ADD outside of your job in your real life, it's really difficult to do that when at work. I was beginning to struggle navigating the whole, it's okay to do it at work, but you also need to be able to, because obviously, in the work environment, in hindsight, you don't and you can't, well, you can, but I wouldn't, and you can't really leave things unfinished, because it's work, it's a job, and people's lives are at stake. So, I always got back to finishing it, but it was really just wearing on me that I need to be able to start a task and finish it, but yet when I'm at work, I'm constantly having to do everything but what I need to be focusing on doing in my life, which is completing a task. And also having that realization that what I consider being good at multitasking is not really being good at multitasking. It's constantly starting and not finishing. So, yeah, I just, I'm this year at the beginning of the year was when I kind of had what I talk about in my podcast as my ADD rock bottom. And I don't really want to get into that in great lengths right now. I'm driving into work, and I came to the realization after being diagnosed for 8 years and not really doing much to work with it other than just taking medication and thinking that fixed everything. And it does not. Let me just tell you. Medication is the number one top treatment for ADD. But it's not. I think the biggest misunderstanding that is out there is that even though it's the number one, first line of defense when you have ADD, it's not. You cannot manage ADD with medication alone. And my journey to getting diagnosed and the first line of doctors and therapists that I worked with didn't tell me that. So, the misunderstanding that happens with ADD, ADHD is even in the healthcare profession. Even doctors and therapists don't have the proper information to navigate patients as to how to manage their ADD. And so at the beginning of this year, in 2021, through a series of life events, through this pandemic, one moment please, through a series of events, I was able to pinpoint that I have hit rock bottom in the ADD world. My ADD, my unmanaged ADD brain has been hijacked, has been taken over completely. And quite honestly, when you have ADD, if you have undiagnosed ADD, or if you have unmanaged ADD, and I personally consider someone who just takes medication and doesn't manage it with other tools, you may as well consider yourself unmanaged. Because medication doesn't fix. There is no fixing yourself when you have ADD. It's about educating yourself and learning what it means to have ADD. What does it do to my brain? How does the brain even work? I mean, you gotta learn how a brain functions and works when you have any kind of mental health disorder. And so that's what I'm doing. By February, I started listening. I was like, it's time to educate myself, because I hit rock bottom and realized in ADD, not a whole life, it was not a complete and total life rock bottom. It was just an ADD rock bottom for me. It was realizing that my ADD has completely taken over my brain and my mind. It has hijacked it. And when you exist in a ADD hijacked, when you exist in that world, that is when you do not feel in control of your life. And that is one of the worst feelings in the world, when you feel like you are out of control. A lot of people who suffer from addictions are out of control, and they manage, and they use drugs and alcohol to manage their ADD and ADHD. I'm very thankful that I do not fall into that category of people, but a lot of people do. And everybody's ADD or ADHD, whether you're a child, a teen, an adolescent, an adult, it always looks different from person to person, because nobody shares the same DNA, period. But then each individual person, ADD presents itself very differently throughout your life. So if you're diagnosed as a child, then things may look very differently than someone like me who lived my entire life not knowing that I had ADD until I was like 32. I am now 40. But even the thing that is really sad and difficult is that so little is known or misunderstood about ADD and ADHD that so many kids get diagnosed with it. But when there isn't a full understanding, when the parents don't fully understand what it is and how to manage it, and they don't get educated other than what the doctor tells them, and if you don't go and see the right doctors to get the right information and the right help and get you into the right therapies, then you may as well be undiagnosed, because you're gonna just go through life as a kid. And I say this because I wasn't diagnosed until I was 32. So I went my whole childhood just feeling stupid. I felt stupid. Literally. Like, I felt stupid until I got into my medical lab technology program, which is, what I do for a living. And I've said before, not here for whoever listens to this, because I'm going to start putting this on YouTube. I'm going to start doing some videos. I mean, I'm loving the podcast, and I'm going to continue that as well. But the podcast, I'm trying to use that as a tool to help me with, like, time management, help me stay focused so my listeners don't feel lost, because the ADD brain has us going 100 miles an hour, and but then there's just times where I want to be able to just, like, boom, I want to just be full ADD and say what I need to say and not be so concerned about, am I talking too much? Am I veering off from the topic too much? Like, I need to balance out, because it takes me quite some time to get an episode published, because, I do want my podcast to come across as very easy to understand and follow, and I'm slowly learning more about editing. Like, I finally, I found an app that helps me edit my audio, so it's a little cleaner to listen to. But I am in the process of working on editing episode 5 right now, and I'm realizing this morning, that, I need some balance. I started a YouTube channel as a part of this podcast, because what I'm doing is, I like crafting. When you have ADHD, it's really, really important for you on a daily basis to, brain health when you have ADD is so important. Brain health. You need to educate yourself on the brain, which is what I'm trying to do in my podcast. But you also need to understand how the brain works, and you need to take care of your brain. It sounds silly when you think about it, but you literally have to do brain exercises every day. You need to do things incorporate into your daily schedule, things as from what I am learning as I educate myself, is that the more brain calming activities that you can do on a regular basis, the better and the easier it will become to manage your ADD. My podcast is, I named it Wait, Please Don't Scroll. And that title manifested itself as a result of my addiction to TikTok. That was when, I still enjoy TikTok, but I literally had to take like a 3-month break, and I was not even, I wouldn't even let myself open the app. Because when you have ADD, whether you know you have it or not, doesn't matter. That is like a haven for people with ADD. And if you have ever been on TikTok, it's kind of like this with Facebook as well, but in different ways. For the ADD brain, TikTok is really addictive. And so when I was introduced to TikTok at the very end of 2019, it's all about like, you just open it up and there's a video that plays, and usually it's kind of like, people try to be funny or whatever. But they play for anywhere from 15 seconds, 30 or 60. And, so then to get to the next video, you have to swipe, to scroll, right? And, and when you have ADD, like, I know for me, I can only speak for myself, but like, I think that for me, I would watch a video for like 3 seconds, and I could know within like 3 seconds if it was going to grab my attention enough to want to watch the whole video. So, in other words, I was doing a lot of scrolling. Scroll, next video. Ooh, that one looks good, and then I'll watch it. And then not only do you keep scrolling because we struggle with patience, but we keep scroll, and because of the nature of that platform, that social media platform, people started saying at the very beginning of their TikToks, they would go, wait, please don't scroll. I need you to hear this. So when I was trying to come up with a name for my podcast, I was all like, I need a good name for my podcast. I had began, in my journey to start a podcast, I started listening to a lot of podcasts so I could kind of get an idea about what people do, how they do it. And one of my favorite podcasts was Rick Glassman's Take Your Shoes Off podcast. And it took a handful of episodes of that before I was like, God, where did that name come from? Take Your Shoes Off podcast. Like, and so eventually I listened to enough episodes where he talks about it. And so he has autism, and he was diagnosed as an adult, like very late in life. And so for him, there were things about him that he didn't know. Like, he knew he had OCD and anxiety and stresses and depressions. Like, he knew a lot of stuff, but he didn't get the autism diagnosis until he was much later in life. And so because of all of his stuff that comes along with autism and the OCD and the anxieties, like, he wouldn't allow people in his house because he was so just caught up in the way the brain, controlled his functioning, or existing in life and navigating life. And so when he decided to start, he's a comedian, but when he made the decision to start the podcast, he did that as a means of like personal therapy. Like, he needed to work with being able to have people in his home, in his space. He had to learn how to navigate that, because you can't live a life never having people in your home unless you get married or have a dog. So Take Your Shoes Off was like, having the shoes off was one of the things that is a must for him. Like, he cannot handle knowing all of the dirt and the grime and, as he says, all of the shit and the piss that people walk on when they're outside. He was like, no, I don't want that stuff in my house. But so when I learned how he came up with the name of his podcast, I was like, when you're coming up with a title for a business or a podcast or a YouTube channel or whatever, it needs to grab people's attention. That's just kind of like a basic thing. But I just didn't know what that looked like. I was like, I need a name. And so Since I really wanted to focus on talking about living my best life with attention deficit disorder, I was like, well, TikTok was the reason I ended up kind of hitting my ADD rock bottom. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like, people who have ADD really struggle with patience. So like, I thought, wait, please don't scroll. So like, the idea was that people will be scrolling through trying to find something to listen to maybe, and maybe they'll see, wait, and be like, what is this? Don't scroll, and just check it out. So there you go. This is my first video for my YouTube channel where I want to embrace more of just allowing myself to be free with my ADD and just talk about whatever comes to mind. And then I will save that structure and working through time management on that for my podcast. So check out my podcast. Wait, please don't scroll. Or I have another playlist that I am doing some of my craft projects, and I'm videoing just me doing my crafts, and then I'm playing some episodes of either other podcasts or maybe I'll play the audio from a podcast I record while I do it. So this one's going to be like ADD Diaries or ADD in the Raw. We'll figure it out, but thank you for listening or watching. In true ADD fashion, I started my morning ADD rant going into talking about my ADD morning, but I got all over the place, which is what we do. Which is why I've decided to make these videos, because this is just what happens to us, me. So I was trying to talk about how, due to the pandemic, we, at my current job, which I love, is that we were working a limited schedule. We, like, from March of 2020 until this past Monday, I worked 12 to 5. They did that to lessen the amount of people in the building at one time, and we have to wear masks, yada yada. But so my mornings are very difficult this week because Monday was my first day back to work full time since March of 2020. Well, we'll say April of 2020 because, yeah, April 2020. So it's been over a year. And having all of this extra time has been nice, but also was a big contributing factor to the loss of just mindfulness and awareness that I even had ADD. Sorry, I'm chewing gum. I just realized that you can see my gum. But so throughout the period of 2020, my ADD was like unleashed. It was like off the chain, whatever you want to call it. And then, of course, crash and burn, because that's just the way life feels a lot of times when you have ADD. I realized that, I had my ADD, rock bottom in like January of this year. And so, I have luckily had the past like 5 months of time to, try to learn to better manage my ADD before going back to work full time. And so Monday was great. Like, I managed to wake up on time, and I was able to get a bunch of things done that morning before I went to work. I left on time, I was on time for work, and now it's only Thursday, and like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday progressively gets more and more difficult for me to get to work on time. I'm still waking up on time. Well, kind of. Oh, really? Oh, this is not cool. I'm trying to go on my lunch period and I forgot my wrap to eat with my lunch today. So I was going to go to the Mediterranean place and get some pita bread to eat with my avocado salad. But that is one good thing that I've done this week that I'm really proud about. I promised myself that when I went back to work full time, I would better discipline myself and develop better eating habits, because I probably this entire pandemic put on a total of about 30 pounds, which I'm not happy about. And I need to, have better eating habits and so forth. And, yeah, I'm gonna have to turn around because I'm not gonna have time to sit through this. But I am trying to turn around because I just don't have time. I'm gonna have to eat my avocado salad without pita bread because I just don't have time. I only get 30 minutes for lunch, not an hour. If I had an hour, I'd wait, but I don't. So I'll just have to eat my lunch without it. But yes, so I have done really good this week about eating, packing a lunch, and excluding processed foods. I am not kidding when I say that I lived on processed foods, except for dinner. 90% of what I ate between the time I woke up until dinner consisted of because I went to work at 12, so I would take snacks instead of like meal and blah blah blah. So I survived on basically Takis, Quaker Oats chewy granola dips that are dipped in chocolate. I've always been a sugar addict, so lots of sugar from all kinds of different sources. I'm sweets. I love sweets. So yeah. So this week has been difficult because even though I'm giving myself an hour and a half to 2 hours in the morning before I go to work at 9, I'm still struggling to keep myself going and on time for leaving and being on time for work. So, yay. But I figured, one thing that I'm kind of noticing is that the more I educate myself, the more I learn about ADD and how it works and how it affects our brain and just how a brain works in general and how ADD then impacts the functioning of our brain and what we have to do to manage and control it. One thing that I noticed is that the more I talk about it verbally, the more I learn and the better I learn, which is why I wanted to do the podcast, because I wanted to verbalize it, which is working, but I have like a million thoughts running through my head all the time about all this stuff and things that I want to say, and by the time I actually have time in my schedule to sit down at my lovely space that I've created for myself at home, I am either too tired or all of the things that were in my head earlier while I was at work my work is I love my work so much because, like I was saying earlier, it's very repetitive work. And I don't have to struggle. I mean, literally, it's like the perfect job for me. But because my job in itself taught me a lot about my ADD. But it's very repetitive and it's very independent work. I mean, I work with other people and we work together, but my part of the job, it's like a 3-part job. You got 2 people that run the tests, I process the samples, but I do some testing and they help me do some processing, but I'm the main processor, so when I'm processing and plating, it's just me and myself, and we're allowed to wear like our earphones, so I listen to music or I listen to audiobooks, and so like I'm always in my head about all the stuff I want to talk about on my podcast, but like I can't, I'm really bad about journaling. One tip that they give to people for managing ADD, because we are very forgetful, is to kind of like keep a pad and paper in a lot of the very common areas that you, sorry, my nose is running just a tad out of nowhere. But I'm vaccinated, so I should not be worrying about COVID right now. Can't speak for everybody else in the world, but we won't go there because we are talking about ADD. But see, making that little side comment, distracted myself, and that's another. This is why I'm doing this video, because, you know, honestly, I feel like I'm talking to myself when I do this video, and because I can see myself in my phone. So, because I can see myself in the phone, it feels like I'm talking to somebody. Podcasting, one of the reasons why podcasting is difficult is because you are having a conversation with yourself, essentially, and that is difficult. So, when I do a video like this, it makes me feel like I'm at least talking to somebody, even though it's myself. But, yeah, so... My first episode of my podcast was my own worst enemy. And that thought comes up in my head on a daily, regular basis. Like I just had a moment just now where one of my own thoughts distracted me from what I was talking about. And then I forgot what I was talking about. I am my own worst enemy, and then I just dropped my phone. Now I'm gonna eat my lunch and go back to work.